data breach today? If your organization experienced a data breach today, are you confident enough that you would be fully compliant with the law or with the Act, which specifically is the Data Protections Act 2019? But even more important question to me would be, would you be prepared for the legal, financial, reputational consequences that would follow? The reality is that many organizations believe they are very compliant, whereas in the real practice, a lot of times we find that they are highly exposed. So under the Act, which is Data Protection Act 2019, organizations in Kenya are now operating in a much more regulated environment. This law places clear obligations on how you collect, process, store, and protect personal information or personal data. Yet, what we are seeing across organizations, whether NGOs, schools, corporates, from whichever sector that you are, even including professional firms, is a significant gap between perceived compliance and actual compliance. And that gap is where the risks actually lie. And I hope that in a conversation today that can be able to break it down. So why does this actually matter for you, for me, for organizations across the globe? Ignoring or underestimating data protection requirements actually lead to regulatory penalties, legal exposure, loss of stakeholder trust, reputational damage that can take years to rebuild again. And in some cases, it actually leads or directly impact your funding. If you're an NGO or a PBO for that matter, it would affect your operations or even your ability to continue making and creating value or revenue, as it were, or as you'd actually desire in the foregoing. So in today's session, we will focus on very key elements, and part of which our team will help us understand where organizations are mostly exposed under the Act, identifying the hidden risks that are often overlooked. Last but not least, of course, alongside other aspects would be what practical steps that you can take to protect your organization and safeguard yourself. This is not necessarily going to be a legal lecture. Our team are certainly prepared to be able to make practical, relevant responses, and of course, that directly apply to your organizations. Feel free to ask questions, put some of them in the chat, and of course, whenever you want to say a word, feel free to press the raise your hand button at the bottom of your screen. We will see it and give you a chance. But even for those that might be very pressing, just put it on the Q&A, and we have enough hands to be able to respond to every question, every concern, every feedback that you might have for us to be able to make this conversation very, very interactive. But even as we dive into this, I just want to do a quick check, even for everyone joining the team or joining the call from our audience, on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being not confident and 5 being very or fully confident. How confident are you that your organization is fully compliant with the Data Protection Act 2019? So please drop your number in the chat. Yeah, even as I have the team, even as I introduce the team. So there is already a poll question on the screen right there. You can maybe just submit your key response, just how confident you feel your organization is compliant with the Data Protection Act 2019. And now to the team, our experts, even as I call them closer to just commence the conversation with us at a very in-depth level. This is actually a team of legal experts who are both advocates of the High Court of Kenya, and have made impacts across various aspects in their own rights. Certainly have experience delivering conversations with that relates to data protection, helping you restructure that, set up systems and governance, documentation, registration with the data controller, even helping you put together who the DPOs would be. So we have Ms. Beth Nganga and Onchari Aburi. So Ms. Beth Nganga is a legal and secretarial associate, specializing in data protection, corporate governance, and regulatory compliance, with experience advising very high impact national initiatives. For example, the Maisha number that happened some time back. Aburi also leads the legal and secretarial department, advising organizations across sectors on corporate law, data privacy, and governance, including compliance with the Data Protections Act 2019. So ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, allow me to have the team come on board. Job, do you want to even just show to the team what it means or what it looks like in terms of compliance? So out of those that have responded to the call in terms of a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being not confident and 5 being very confident. So the final result is that's a 3.2. So from this call, just by this poll, it actually shows that half and half. We are about neutral, 50% are not, 50% seem to be very confident, the other are not. And I feel that that is actually a typical scenario of what it means possibly in the entire country. I hope this conversation will help us know how can we actually be very compliant and what steps do we need to take to make that possible. So let me call in the team, Beth or Aburi. Any of you can feel free to step up and feel ready to proceed with the conversation. Welcome. Good. Is Beth or Aburi ready? Beth, you're there with us? Just good morning, Beth.
Morning. How are you?
Good morning, Aburi. How are you?
Fine, thank you. And morning to our viewers.
All right.
And participants who joined our webinar. In addition to the introduction that has been made by Frederick, I'm Aburi Frederick, an advocate of the High Court of Kenya, practicing as such at KKCO East Africa, a firm in Nairobi that has a good ground in audit, advisory, accounting, and secretarial and legal departments or sectors. And in that, I will have Beth to introduce herself.
So, good morning, everyone. I hope you are all well. My name is Beth Nganga, also an advocate of the High Court of Kenya, practicing here at KKCO East Africa, LLP. And I'll not add much because most of the introductory part has already been done. I'd just love to welcome you to our webinar as we discuss the data protection landscape in Kenya. Thank you.
So thank you for that introductory bit. And therefore, we seek your indulgence in terms of allowing us to delve into today's discussions. And generally, today we'll look at the general provisions and the legal frameworks managing data in Kenya, and the compliance aspects. We'll also look at the landscape. If you are an entity or an organization or a person who is processing data, how does it look like for you guys to comply with the Act? And therefore, in a nutshell, we also look at the general provisions of the Act, from data subjects way to the establishment of the Office of the Data Commissioner. And therefore, we'll ask, how well is your data protected, and why must it concern you? Or why is it a concern that we need to ensure that we are compliant with this act? There is an adage that people perceive that whenever a government introduces a law, it's a barrier to businesses. But most of the lawyers will tell you or will advise you that laws are not construed as a barrier to business operations, but a belt that facilitates a peaceful environment for all of us to thrive. And therefore, we also look at why should we comply, and therefore the justification for compliance will be to minimize the risks that are associated to non-compliance, and therefore businesses that does not comply or adhere to the act and the provision thereto will face pecuniary or other related penalties. And therefore, it is in the best interest for organizations, entities to adhere to the provisions of this act and the regulations that are set thereof. So basically, there are three legal frameworks that manages data processing in Kenya. One being the Data Protection Act of 2019. There are also two regulations to that operationalizes the act. That's the Data Protection Regulations of Data Processors and Controllers of 2021, and the Complaint Handling and Enforcement Procedures of 2021. There's also the European Union GDPR of 2026. And therefore, this act originates from Article 31 of the COK of 2010. And therefore, at that juncture, may I now introduce Madam Beth to take us through the next stage.
Thank you, Senior. I'll dive right into the legal framework, or rather the landscape governing data protection in Kenya, and as my colleague has already alluded to, there are several statutes that govern data protection in Kenya, with the main one being the Data Protection Act of 2019, which is then supported by the subsequent regulations, such as the Data Protection General Regulations of 2021, the Data Protection Registration of Data Controllers and Data Processors Regulations also of 2021. So as Mr. Frederick has said, the Data Protection Act derives its authority from Article 31C and D of the Constitution of Kenya. This article provides for the right to privacy of every individual. So it includes the right not to have a person's home or property searched, the right not to have their information relating to their family or private affairs unnecessarily required or revealed, and the right not to have their private conversations or communications infringed upon by unauthorized third parties. So basically, the Data Protection Act and the other regulations that I have alluded to, they bring this article to life by providing the legal and institutional framework in which to implement and ensure that every person's right to privacy is protected. So what are the core objectives of the Data Protection Act? Firstly, the Data Protection Act regulates the processing of personal data to protect individuals' privacy rights. So it basically provides the lawful confines within which data processing is carried out by data controllers and processors. And then secondly, it provides for the rights of data subjects in relation to their personal data, thereby giving a data subject, or rather the person or the owner of the personal data which is being processed, control and autonomy of their data, over their data, on how it's going to be used, disseminated and processed. And then thirdly, it imposes obligations on data controllers and processors. So the Act, as a data controller and processor, you can't just process data as you wish. The Act imposes obligations upon yourselves, as will be discussed in a later section of this webinar, to ensure that the data subject's personal data is processed lawfully. And then lastly, it establishes mechanisms for addressing violations and seeking redress. Under this objective, the Act establishes the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner, and this is basically the regulatory authority that oversees the implementation, enforcement, the complaints procedure, and also conducting inspections to ensure that every data controller and processor adheres to the laws. So it's important to point out that our Data Protection Act is one of the most comprehensive legal framework governing data privacy in Africa. And it mirrors the EU GDPR, so we borrow a lot from the EU GDPR, just to ensure that every person's right to privacy is protected, especially in this era that we are living in of digitization, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things. So I'll now go into the second section of answering who does the Act apply to. So Section 4 of the Data Protection Act outlines the applications of this Act, basically who is subject to the provisions of this Act. It provides that all data processors and data controllers, provided that they are handling and processing personal data of individuals within Kenya, they are subject to the Act. So they are legally bound by the provisions of the Act and also the subsequent regulations. So it does not matter whether you are a foreign company or you are a local company, as far as you are processing personal data of data subjects here in Kenya, you are bound by the Act. So you have heard me speak of terms such as data controllers, data processor, data subjects, personal data. So I'll go right to define what these terms mean, so that as the webinar progresses, you get to understand what are your obligations and what are the compliance requirements stipulated in the Act. So I start with the data controller. A data controller is any natural or legal person who determines the purpose and means of processing personal data. This can include businesses, government agencies, NGOs, and just basically any organizations that decides why and how personal data is processed. An example would be a bank collecting customer information for account opening. Another example would be, for instance, I believe that as you are registering for this webinar, you used a link, and in this link, you're supposed to fill out your name, your email, your job title, the organization that you work in. So by virtue of filling that link and submitting your details to now KKCO, that makes us a data controller, because we will be processing your personal data as you're filled out in the form for purposes of this webinar. And then a data processor now is a natural or legal person who processes personal data on behalf of the data controller. So basically, a data processor acts under the instructions of the data controller and does not determine the purposes of processing. So an example would be, let's say, a cloud service provider who stores customer data for a bank. You see now the cloud service provider is acting on the instructions of the bank, which is the data controller. And then thirdly, I'll proceed to define personal data. What amounts to personal data? So personal data is any information relating to an identified or identifiable natural person, who in this case is the data subject. So details such as your name, your ID number, your location, your online identifier, your genetic information, all of that amounts to personal data because it identifies you. It basically gives you your information relating to your identity. And then we have another category. The Act also defines sensitive personal data. So when you say that personal data is sensitive, it's any data that reveals your racial or ethnic origin, the political opinions, religious beliefs, genetic data, biometric data, health data, or data concerning a natural person's sex life or sexual orientation. And based on these examples, this amounts to sensitive information regarding yourself. And so the Data Protection Act places stricter requirements on how this data will be processed. So I'll also define who is a data subject. A data subject is an identified or identifiable natural person who is the subject of personal data. This includes employees, customers, suppliers, website visitors, or just any individual whose personal data is processed by your organization. So alluding to the example I've given, when you are registering for this webinar, you input your details. So that makes you a data subject for purposes of data processing. And lastly is I'll define what amounts to data processing. It's any operation or set of operations performed on personal data, whether or not by automated means, and it includes collecting the data, recording the data, organizing the data, adapting or rectifying the data, retrieval, and consultation. So any activity that involves data collection or whether the collected data you are sharing it with other people, that is dissemination. All of these activities amount to data processing, and they are regulated by the Data Protection Act. So I will hand over to Mr. Aburi, who will take you through the hidden financial risks of non-compliance.
Thank you, Beth, for that elaborate discussions on that area. I'll be happy to take you through the hidden financial risks and generally understanding what's the entity or your organization's risks if at the end of the day you are taken maybe through the court of law and you are found to be non-compliant. So one striking difference between our Act 2019 and the European Union GDPR is the issue on criminal liability and penalties that are apportioned to those entities or persons that are non-compliant with the data legal frameworks. And therefore, in terms of penalties and fines for the non-complying agents or entities, there is an imposition of a financial cost of penalty of around a maximum of 5 million or a turnover of 1%, whichever that may be lower. And this is imposed by the Commissioner for failure to comply with the provisions of the Act and the regulations thereto. And the penalties or the remedies will be enforcement notices once you are found to be non-compliant, administrative fines, where you'll be given a deterrent fine to prevent a repeating such an offense or infringement. There will be also penalties or notices, which will be monetary in nature for having the commissioner or the other adverse party having proven that their rights were infringed upon. In terms of compensation claims, data subjects will be compensated in case the judgment or ruling is in their favor, and such compensatory claims or fines are quite hefty, just to redress them for such infringement. The other aspect will be the criminal liability as provided under the Act, and therefore, as I had alluded earlier, this is the only difference between ourselves and the provisions under the EU GDPR. And therefore, since now we have the criminal liability, the Act provides that both the organization, the persons who might be found culpable to have not or facilitated compliance, will be fined and even be committed to an imprisonment for a period of time. And therefore, as an organization, we are called upon to ensure that the frameworks that you're working under are complying with the Act and the provisions thereto. In terms of the classical examples of rulings that we have recently heard from the Office of the ODPC, there are landmark cases. One is of a restaurant here in Kilimani that a complaint was made against them, and the claimant was able to demonstrate that their rights were infringed. And the item was that the reveller, or a photo of a reveller was taken without her consent, and she proceeded to make a complaint, and the restaurant was found culpable for infringing her privacy by taking a photo and posting that photo on one of their social media platforms. She was awarded a damage of around 500,000. The other classic example is a school here in Nairobi that is in the public domain, where a photo of a learner was taken for marketing purposes without the parental consent. And in that aspect, the claimant was able to demonstrate that their rights were infringed and that consent was not sought at the time of taking that photo. And the ODPC, or the commissioner, ruled in favor of the claimant, and that child or that family was awarded around 1 million. So you can see these fines are quite hefty, and we'll call you upon to ensure that you comply with this act. In terms of the sectors that are called upon to ensure that they have complied, the Act provides that both organizational, whether it's a religious organization, companies, NGOs, churches, schools, financial institutions, should register with the ODPC and must comply with the provisions of the Act. In the website of the Data Commissioner, they have set about 17 industries that they should mandatorily register with the Data Protection Act and nominate a person who should act as their DPO. And those sectors include entertainment joints or companies, financial institutions such as banks, schools, churches, and the like. So in terms of other hidden financial costs that may not necessarily be financial, Of course, if you are found non-compliant, like the examples we've given, like now the school and the restaurant, most people will shy away from bringing their children or coming to your organization to have good time. You are in a restaurant, and therefore such non-compliance has a direct a non-financial cost, which will be reputational damage. In that if it's a school, the parents or your guardians will not be willing to bring their kids or learners to your institution, basically because they feel that their personal data for their kids is not guaranteed. The other aspect will be operational disruptions. This, of course, is a direct hidden cost in that when you will be doing litigations or appearing before the ODPC, or if this matter would have proceeded to a court of law, it means that you'll be having more time to spend in those litigations. And of course, if there were a financial cost imposed on you, it means that you are going to pay that cost. And if you had not budgeted for that cost in your annual budget, it means you are going to disrupt most of the operations to cater for that cost. Number three will be you'll be exposed to litigations. And therefore, if you have not registered and you have at least maybe 5 or so cases or complaints registered with the commissioner's office, it means that your office or your entity is exposed to lawsuits. The other one will be on loss of business opportunities. Data certificates, which include now data controller and the processor certificates, have become key checkpoints or checklists for most of our organizations. And therefore, before organizations give you business, they usually check whether you are complying with this data controller and data processor by you sharing the certificates before they engage you in terms of giving you business. And therefore, if you are non-compliant or you have not registered with the commissioner, you risk losing business because this has become one of the compliance areas for businesses. The other emerging issue will be insurance premiums, in that this being a compliance aspect, organizations are now using or having huge chunks of money to pay as premium just to cover organizations or individuals in case such an breach occurs and we are found liable. And therefore, I invite Madam Beth to take us through the legal liabilities and exposure.
Thank you, Fred. So in this section, I will speak to you about your legal obligations as a data processor and controller, and the risks now if you are not compliant. So before I go to the duties of the data processors and controllers, I will begin by speaking about the rights of data subjects. This is critical because as a data controller and processor, you have to know the rights of your data subjects and that subsequently ensure that they are well informed of their rights. So the rights of data subjects are provided for in Section 26 of the Data Protection Act. So failure to respect these rights can lead to formal complaints, enforcement actions, and compensation claims. It's therefore critical for any organization to ensure that they respect and adhere to the rights of data subjects. So the first right is the right to be informed. Every data subject has the right to know how their personal data is used. So as a data controller or processor, you have to provide clear, concise, and transparent information at the point of data collection. Secondly, a data subject has the right to access their personal data. So when you collect any personal data from data subjects, they are allowed to access it, to know the purposes of why you're processing that data, the categories of this personal data, who will be the recipient, and what are the retention period, like what is the time that you'll be storing this personal data in your database. And then thirdly, every data subject has the right to rectification of inaccurate or misleading data. This is in line with the principle of accuracy stipulated under the principles of data protection. So a data subject can require you to correct inaccurate or incomplete data without undue delay. And failure to adhere to their request can leave you exposed to enforcement actions and subsequently the compensation claims. And then fourthly is the right to erasure, also known as the right to be forgotten. A data subject can request deletion of their data when it's no longer necessary, or when the consent is withdrawn, or if the data processing process was found to be unlawful. And then fourthly is the right to object. A data subject can object to processing of their data based on legitimate interest or for direct marketing purposes. So once a data subject asks you as an organization to stop processing their personal data, you have to respect these rights. Otherwise, you expose your organization to legal risks. A case in point is whereby after you have collected the information, let's say emails, personal contacts, you bombard the data subject with marketing information. And as far as they clearly articulate that they would like you to stop, sending them these promotional messages, you are, as a data processor and controller, you have the obligation to respect their right to object to any further processing of this personal data. SBM Bank was fined 500,000 for sending promotional messages, despite the data subject expressing that he no longer wants to receive the promotional messages. So this is something that each organization should adhere to. And then lastly is the right to data portability. A data subject has the right to receive their data in a structured, commonly used and machine readable format and transmit it to another controller without any hindrance. So as a data processor or controller, you are not supposed to be the hindrance between the transfer of information from one data controller to the other, as far as the data subject has given you the appropriate consent. So every organization must implement mechanisms to ensure that data subjects exercise their rights easily. Organization should also train their staff on handling of these requests, maintenance of proper records, and also quick response to these queries raised by the data subjects. I then proceed to cross-border transfer risks. These involve transferring personal data outside Kenya. Section 48 of the Act prohibits sharing or transferring of personal data outside Kenya unless specific conditions are met. Violations of this section lead to regulatory bans, fines, suspension of data protections, and even civil lawsuits. So as a data processor and controller, what are the legal basis that you can give to the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner when you want to transfer this data out of Kenya? Number one, you have to satisfy the ODPC that you have put in place appropriate safeguards in the recipient country to ensure that the security of this personal data is imminent. Number two, the DPC has to determine or has to satisfy itself that indeed there are adequate protective safeguards in this country that you want to transfer to, so that you can be authorized to make the transfer. And then another ground is necessity. This is transfer. These are instances where you want to transfer data to another country for purposes of performance of a contract, a legal claim, public interest, or vital interest. And then it is also, as a data processor or controller, you have to ensure that the data subject gives explicit consent on the transfer of their personal data out of Kenya. So to put this into perspective, I hope you can all remember the WorldCoin saga, whereby a company from USA came to collect biometric data of Kenyans, whereby they were scanning I believe it was the iris, and also collecting fingerprint data for purposes of issuing WorldCoin cryptocurrencies. And the ODPC raised concerns on how they were collecting this data, and also because after collection, they would transfer this data to their servers in the USA for processing. So this company was taken to court, and the High Court ruled that it had not obtained consent from the data subjects regarding the transfer of their data out of Kenya. And as a result, the High Court ordered them to stop their operations here in Kenya and to delete all of the personal data that they had collected, and also to stop any further processing of personal data. So you can imagine the amount and the magnitude of loss that they encountered after the investment they had put in. So it's just critical to ensure, as a data controller or processor, that you have complied with this section of the Act, which includes obtaining the consent from the data subjects, also informing the ODPC and ensuring that they are satisfied that the adequate safeguards are in place. So for sensitive personal data, cross-border processing of sensitive data is prohibited, and it's only allowed when there is explicit consent from the data subject, there is proof of appropriate safeguards, and there is written approval from the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner. So, so using cloud services, payment processors, or marketing platforms that store data outside Kenya without proper safeguards or consent is a frequent compliance failure with serious consequences, as I have alluded to with regard to the WorldCoin judgment. So I'll then proceed to discuss the top 5 legal risks that businesses face as a result of the compliance requirements put in place by the Act. So one of the risks is failure to register with the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner. The Act requires that every organization carrying out processing of data to register with the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner under Section 18. So failure to register as a data processor or controller, as the case may be, leaves the organization at risk of hefty penalties as my senior had alluded to, which is 5 million or 1% of the annual turnover, or you also stand the risk of facing suspension of operations. And then secondly is ignoring data subjects' rights. So when you fail to respond to the access, rectification, erasure, or objection request within the statutory timeframes, you are likely to face enforcement actions and compensation claims. This is after the data subject lodges the complaint with the ODPC and they then find you in breach of these rights. And then thirdly is the risk of unlawful cross-border transfers. Remember, as I've just explained, that transferring personal data out of Kenya without the adequate safeguards, the adequacy decisions from the ODPC, and the explicit consent is unlawful. So it is critical to ensure that while you're undertaking that process, you ensure that all the requirements of Section 48 of the Act are met. And then we have the inadequate security safeguards, failing to implement the appropriate technical or organizational measure to protect the personal data exposes the organization to data breaches. And so in case a data breach happens in your organization, you are obliged to report the same to the ODPC within 72 hours and also to the data subjects. And then we have the commercial use of personal data without consent. This is one of the risks that businesses face. As an example has been given of a minor who was studying in Nova Pioneer. So they published the data, they published the image of that girl without the consent of the parents, and subsequently they were fined around 950,000. So these are the risks that you face because of non-compliance. And as I always say that the cost of complying with these requirements are way lower than the hefty fines and the business risks and the financial risks that come with non-compliance. So I will hand it over to Fred, who will take you through the compliance requirements and explain now what you must do as an organization in order to stay compliant.
Thank you, Beth, for that elaborate discussion from Chapter 3. I'll now take you through Chapter 4, which will focus on the mandatory registrations and compliance aspects. So we categorized these compliance requirements into categories. The first category is that you, as an organization or as an individual who's processing personal data, you require to register with the data commissioner as a data controller and processor. And therefore, this is usually done before you commence business, but since most of the businesses were operational before the enactment of this act, and therefore we are called upon now to, if you are not registered, to register with the office of the data controller, data commissioner, as a controller and a processor. The other aspect will be that you also need to appoint a data officer, which is a key compliance aspect, so that this person now will be a person who will be liaising between the organization and the office of the data commissioner. So the key, we had alluded that the key mandatory industries that must register include those that operate within the financial service, those that are doing betting, those service providers who provide security services such as CCTV, security, education, those organizations and the entities that operate within the healthcare industry, the transport industry, marketing, and even telecommunication. And therefore, if you log into the ODPC website, the website provides those 17 industries that organizations operating within those parameters should register. And they have operationalized the registration of organization through a website, and all these services are online, and we can support in terms of registering your organizations or persons in that aspect. And of course, there are exemptions, and that website, they have provided that there are categories of persons or industries that don't need to register. But from a legal perspective, I would advise that as far as you are processing personal data, you need to register, and therefore we have no exemption of not registering the data controller. The other compliance aspect that will be interesting that you need to do a data processing assessment exercise within your organization. It's a compliance aspect. The other one will be that you also need to train your people or your staff on the elements of data processing. In terms of the principles of data processing, you are called upon that whenever you have an exercise of processing data, that you must be guided by the principle of truthfulness, transparency, and fairness, so that the personal data that you only need is that information that upholds the people's integrity and the right to privacy. Therefore, you as an entity or an organization, once you are processing data, you need to be transparent to the data subjects, why you are collecting this kind of data, and where would you be storing, or where would be the end game, the data that you are processing. The other one would be that while you are processing data, you should try to minimize the data that you are collecting. For example, if you are a service provider who is doing recruitment, there are those essential data that you wish to have from a candidate who is applying for a certain position. And therefore, personal data like the names of the kids at that point of recruitment does not really, you don't need such information. The other aspect would be, or the other principle would be that the personal data that you are processing should or must be accurate. And therefore, it is key that the data that you are storing, if you are an entity, should be accurate, so that if you are processing, maybe you are an organization that does accounting services, you are having personal data such as maybe a bank account, KRA PIN, so that you reduce the risks that are associated with the inaccurate data. You can imagine you have an inaccurate, or you've uploaded inaccurate data, and you are paying maybe salaries, and you have maybe 20 or so inaccurate bank accounts. That will be huge loss to an organization, and therefore that's why we are requesting that the data that you are processing should be accurate. And if it is inaccurate, there is a provision that you should rectify or amend the inaccurate data. In terms of storage, we have alluded that you only store data that is relevant, and those that are irrelevant, you don't need to keep within your organization. And of course, storage limitation is guided by statutory or an act of parliament that provides that if you are organizations and you are keeping records, there is a threshold that you should store data. In terms of accountability, all the data processor and controller, they are called upon by the acts to ensure that they are responsible for their acts, and they must demonstrate compliance with all these data principles that are set forth in the Act. The other aspect that we wish you to understand is the technical and organizational security safeguards. And generally, Section 41 of the Act provides that processors and controllers should implement appropriate mechanisms within the organization to ensure that the data they are storing, correcting, or processing is stored, and there are no leakages of such data. And therefore, there are aspects of organizational measures that organizations should do to ensure that they are compliant. The first aspect in terms of organizational measures should be that organizations should ensure that there are policies that relate to data processing. And therefore, if you are a school or a hospital or a church, you should be able to have in place a policy that guides the general data processing. Then you are also required to train your staff on the provisions of the Act and the relation thereto and the emerging issues within that framework. You also called upon to ensure that you reduce risks associated with the leakages or breaches. And for instance, in this era of technology and IT innovations, most organizations, they are shifting from hard copies to online storages, which is one of the aspects that you as an organization should ensure. And of course, if you are adherent to hard copy, or you should ensure that whatever document you have or data, it's safe from breaches or even unauthorized persons or exposure. In terms of technical measures, this only relates to IT and innovation. And most of these instances, organizations are moving towards encryption of their data and saving most of their data in cloud and the right. And therefore, we'll call upon, once there is a breach within an organization, you are called upon to notify the office of the data commissioner within the 72 hours of that breach. If you are a data processor and a data controller. And what that necessitates that once such a breach has occurred, once you notify the commissioner, you also need to notify the persons or the victims whose information have been leaked or the breach has occurred and their information or data is exposed. Moving forward, in terms of processing of data, there are aspects that organizations are required to undertake, and under Section 30 of the Act requires that persons who are processing personal data must be guided by the 6 bases for data processing, and you must determine the lawfulness of data processing. And one aspect that is key is consent. So if you are collecting personal data from individuals, you ought to have sought their consent in terms of collecting their personal data. The other aspect will be other issues on obligations, especially on legal obligations, which requires that if you are a data controller and a processor, you are under a legal obligation to ensure that the data you are collecting is processed according to the provisions of the Act. Moving forward, we had alluded that one aspect that entities should do is to ensure that they have nominated a DPO, a data protection officer, and such has been registered. And the DPO is an officer that will be a liaison person between your entity or an organization with the data controller. And therefore, all those organizations that will register as processors and controller, you need to nominate and appoint a person who will act as such. In terms of your action plan, this will be our last area. And we'll be taking you through now, since you've known what the provisions of the Act are, what must you do to ensure that you are compliant? So the first aspect that if an assessment is done by the data commissioner will be that as an organization, have you conducted a data audit? So a data audit exercise will tell an organization or inform an organization, while you are processing data, which areas are quite risky and what can you do to ensure that you've closed all those aspects. And therefore, data audit for an organization is key. The other aspect will be that you need to draft policies that manages data processing. So that's key, and we are calling upon organization that if you have no data policy, you should ensure that you have one, to ensure that there is a framework on how you should process data, from storage to even destruction, and even you have the rights of data subjects in that policy. The other key aspect will be that you need to register with the Data Protection Commissioner, and here we advise that you register both as a data controller and data processor. The other aspect is that you should ensure that there is a lawful basis for data processing, and we've looked through all that aspect. The other will be that you appoint a DPO, already alluded to that. The other aspect will be that you need to ensure that there is a response plan in case there is a breach. There is already laid down plan on how you should handle the data breach. And we've seen most organizations struggling in this aspect, where you'll have a breach and the executive management team, they get in an uphill task to decide who would be notified first. You see, the stakeholders, whether it's the directors, shareholders, or the victims, or even the parents if it was a school. And therefore, a response plan is key in terms of ensuring that you are compliant with these provisions. The last aspect will be that there is need for organization to review their third-party arrangements. This includes contracts, especially those contracts that were entered before this act was enacted or implemented. Lastly, there is need that we do regular training for our staff. This will ensure that people are versed with the provisions of the Act, the matching issues, and this can be done through workshops, town halls, workshops. You can even send persons to these formal trainings where they are issued with certificates. Yeah. So those are the 10 key aspects that you need to do and engage yourselves whether we have complied with the data. And therefore, if you already met the 10, therefore, we are of the view that at least you've complied with this act at 90% late. So there are, of course, advantages for complying with this act, especially where we alluded that if you are non-compliant, then most of the business services will not be associating with you. And therefore, if you comply with these provisions, it means that you have the confidence of the investors, you have a strong procurement positioning, you enhance customer trust, of course, reducing exposure to issues like litigations and other aspects. Yeah, that will be it for us. Therefore, at that time,
Wonderful. Thanks, Aburi, for that. Just allow me to remind the audience that we will, of course, disseminate or share the presentation with you. I know some of you are asking about it, and that's part of the practice that we ensure that we're able to keep up to or keep up with. I really believe that even as you were listening into the conversation, as we entirely started, you probably wondering whether your company is exposed in bits as being presented by our team of experts. So we shall be offering a limited free data check, which possibly I could call just a risk assessment, but this is very limited to probably the first 5 clients, or rather people who register, to be able to just support your process in being compliant with the entire data protection conversation, as certainly stipulated in the Act. Now, I see quite a lot of good questions that are coming up in the chat. So thank you very much, Job, for posting that. So whatever is on your screen is a QR code that you can scan and just register for purposes of free support, at least on the desktop review regarding data risk areas and just how you can be compliant to that extent. So our team will be available at least to be able to provide support for the first 5 or so clients, or the people who register. And of course, for any further conversations, we can have that on the side. So Beth and Aburi, I see some very good questions, and I liked a lot of them, actually all of them. Just to pick a very specific one that is being raised by Marion Malika, I looked at it and I was like, wow, this is interesting. So the question that Marion is asking is, how complicated is it to apply for data protection? Does any organization actually need a consultant to help them do that? Actually, she went further and says, for INGOs in Kenya, do they need exclusive licenses for the cross-border transfer of data? So Beth, you will respond to the second bit, but the first one, I just wanted to let Marion Malika know that technically, yes, an organization can actually apply on its own for being a processor and a controller. But one of the things that you must understand is that the process of registering this is not inherently complicated. So yes, you can. What often makes it very challenging is not the application itself, because the application is generally just going and doing so on a portal. But remember, there is a process, or there's a process that you have to follow to get to the place where you actually get a certificate of a data controller and a processor. You need to clearly identify whether you are a data controller. So that's a process that a consultant in itself will be able to help you do that. The documentation process that your data and of course processing data flows and processing activities that as our team will be able to support you in clarifying, ensuring that you have the required policies and safeguards. The team is made aware of the depth and the breadth, the breaches that they need to be careful about. So in general, organizations usually just choose consultants to help them in just avoiding the errors in the process of documentation and clarifying some of those things, just to ensure full compliance beyond your registration, as you want to put it, and of course, more importantly, reduce your risks of exposure. So Marion, feel free to certainly reach out should you still need support, but just know that that is something that you can do on your own. Our support in this regard would be more to help you in the process, because the process is very detailed and sometimes tiring, and that's where you need people who have done it extensively with other organizations, have helped put together systems and policies that the ODPC, Office of the Data Protection Commission, will be able to ask you Yeah, including just a whole inventory of just how data moves even from cross-border and all. Beth, you could respond to the second bit of that question that Marion had asked for, even as we respond to most of the other questions. So the question was, for INGs in Kenya, do they need exclusive license for the cross-border transfer or data? So you can respond to that, Beth. And then the other bit is Anne asking, apart from data controller and processor, is there any other registration required? Let me have you respond to those two, even as I pick up as many other questions coming up, and the way JK would say they're coming in thick and fast. But yes, please respond to that, even as I collate the others together.
Okay, thank you for that question regarding the cross-border data transfer. So for the international NGOs, you don't necessarily require an exclusive license. Remember, as I stated, Section 48 provides for the conditions in which cross-border data transfer is allowed. And one of these is that the data controller or the data processor, or in this case, let me use the example of the INGO, you have to inform or satisfy the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner that you have put in place appropriate safeguards to ensure the protection of that personal data, and that there are also appropriate security safeguards in the country that you're transferring the data to. So so as far as you satisfy the Office of the Data Protection that you have put in place the appropriate safeguards, and that you inform them of the reason of the transfer, whether it's out of necessity, the performance of a contract, regarding whether it's a matter of public interest, or whether it's the transfer is necessary to protect the vital interest of the data subject, you are set to go. So you don't necessarily require an exclusive license. So this section only applies when you are transferring the data. So when you're transferring the data, you have to inform the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner, satisfy it that you're putting in place the appropriate safeguards and the reasons for the transfer. Yes, I believe I have answered that question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, the other bit is apart from data controller, registration as a data controller and a processor, is there any other registration required?
There is no other registration requirement because it's stipulated in Section 18. So
Yes.
as an organization, you register when you are registering with the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner. So you only when you are registering, you either you either select that you are a data protection, that you are a data controller, and a data processor in the registration process.
A good question coming from Jeremiah Kiprono, and I would want to link it up with one question here. That so let's say a real scenario of a breach happens today. So whether today or tomorrow, but it actually happens, and you're an organization that is already registered with the Office of the Data Protection Commission. So what would a compliant organization actually do? And what would a compliant organization that is well prepared actually do, as opposed to an organization that is exposed? So I know Kiprono's question is asking, what is the standard procedure or process after a data breach has happened in an organization that is registered with the KKCO? So I think for me, I just wanted to extend his question because I found it very insightful by asking a comparison of a compliant organization that is already registered with the ODPC as opposed to an organization that is not registered and of course exposed. So even as you respond to that, give me a comparison of what it means to a compliant organization that is registered and one that is not, especially where a breach occurs today or tomorrow. Aburi or Beth, any of you can ask, can pick up that question.
So thank you, Fred, for that question. The persons who have asked that question. So there is no difference between those two organizations, those who have registered and those who have not registered in terms of the response approach. But the advantage that the other organization which has registered would have is that they could have reduced the exposure, because if you are registered as a data controller or processor, it means there are aspects that you've already done that this non-compliant or non-registered entity has not done. And therefore, the first, I think I've answered that. There is no much difference. The only difference will come in terms of the risk exposure and the ruling that the ODPC will issue, in that if you are registered, of course, the financial obligations, as the data commissioner will find, you would have reduced. If the same breach could have occurred, the non-compliant maybe will have paid a much higher fine because of non-compliance, even the simple items like registration. But the other entity that has complied in terms of registering, the risk and exposure, of course, will reduce, and the financial costing and the quotation will have reduced. In terms of the response approach, the first item that an organization should do once that such a breach has occurred is that you should ensure that you contain the breach within or immediately or within some around time frame. Therefore, you should stop the unauthorized access or leakage, isolate the affected systems, and therefore maybe if such a breach occurred where online, you should be able to shut down the compromised servers or accounts, and then you recover the exposed data where possible, of course. That will have, of course, the goal will be to prevent further damage. The other aspect or action that entity should do is just to conduct a preliminary assessment, just a quick check on what must have facilitated this kind of breach. So what kind of data that has been affected, the number of individuals that are affected, whether the data that has leaked or the breach relates to sensitive data or personal data, and what is the cause of this kind of breach. Was it an hack? Was it an internal human error, or was it general system failure? So a preliminary assessment is key. The other action that you need to do now is just to notify the office of the ODPC within the set time frame, which we've discussed within the 72 hours. This is provided under Section 43 of the Act. This will also include now, you tell the ODPC the nature of the breach, and as you've done your assessment, which categories of data that has been affected, highlight to them the number of the data subjects that has been affected, the likely consequences of the breach or the leaked information on data, and what measures have you taken as an organization to address this issue. The fourth action that you are mandated to do if you have registered or as an entity is that you need to notify the victims or the data subjects without delay. And therefore, the aspect there is without delay. And of course, delay can be subject. So, of course, you will also inform them and be open and transparent to these persons or individuals that what kind of information has leaked, what happened, what were the possible risks? Was it fraud, or it was just a theft, or maybe internal error? And what steps have you undertaken to ensure that the data now that you have is secure? The second last aspect maybe you can do is just to document the breach. Yeah, do a report, a general report on the occurrence, which include now the time, the data, and the date, the nature of breach, the actions you've taken, and the outcome. So those will be some of the actions that you are required to do. And of course, such happens, then it means you need now to implement other preventive measures in your organization, which will include now do some thorough training to your staff, have strong controls, which include maybe backups, update your policies and procedure of data processing. So in a nutshell, those will be the key aspect that you need to do in case you have such a risk.
Good. So, Aburi, so imagine I am sitting here as a business owner, and so I'm just wondering, how do I practically identify the exact operations where I am most exposed to data protection risks?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, how do I practically identify exact touch points in my operations? I'm running a supermarket, or I'm running a school. Yeah. Which points are these that I'm most exposed to data protection risks?
So to answer you, Fred, as a business owner, you need to identify. Of course, you know what your organization does. So identify the areas of exposure, and this will be, you do a data map exercise.
Okay.
Be proactive in terms of the review of your business data processing. This includes how do you correct data, how do you use the correct data that you have, storage, and how do you disseminate the data that you have. And therefore, data mapping is key. The other aspect is that you need to review the access control as an organization.
Okay.
So you ask yourself, who can access this kind of information, whether it's personal or sensitive data? Do maybe your staff have password? Do they share passwords? Former employees' accounts still active? You know, those are the key areas that you need to do. And of course, the red areas will be if there is shared logins, and that means your data is exposed. Yeah, and of course, there are other things like you need to restrict admin rights.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Then examine data correction points. Yeah. So
there's a question that Ernest is asking, and I wanted to tie it up with one last with an item of just accountability, and he's asking about a question relating to the DPO. I believe that should be the data protections officer in any organization. So I'm just trying to picture what he's written. And the question I wanted to tie it in with is from an organizational standpoint, who should really be accountable for data protection, which I believe is probably everybody. So you correct me if I'm wrong. So that is everybody. But there's a person who is a liaison between the organization and the ODPC. So what does that accountability look like? And this person that is appointed as the DPO, can organizations just choose anyone, or does the ODPC have to approve that DPO? I hope my question is clear. There's a bit of mix-up of DPO, DPC, and the DPO, of course, is the data officer. And so just tell me how that looks like.
So thank you, Fred, for that question. So the Act does not prescribe the qualifications of a data officer.
Okay.
The data officer is just a liaison person between an organization and the office of the data commissioner. And therefore, there are no technical requirements in terms of qualifications for this office. It's just a person who can communicate, who can liaise between the two organizations. But in terms of who is accountable for data controlling, and the key aspect would be generally the key management personnel, the executive.
Okay. The last question I want to tie to, I see Wekesa is asking a good question alongside Belinda, and those questions are very tied together. So Wekesa's question is regarding CCTV footages. And Belinda's question relates to a school function where images are taken, photography, videography, of course, CCTV sometimes are available, and I feel like they're very intertwined. The question, if I tie both, would be, because the question of Belinda is about how do you make everybody, first of all, be aware that this is actually happening. Their footages are being taken through CCTV, and of course, whatever it is that captures their data from an image perspective. How do you ensure that people give you consent, especially from a large scale where learners are many, parents are there, even some strangers from outside are there, and you want consent from people? How do you handle all that at a go from a large scale? Even as you touch on Wekesa's concern about the CCTV context.
So thank you, Fred, and Madam Belinda, and Principal Wekesa. So to answer your question, we've seen notices in public places where you are notified that this building or this premises are under 24-hour CCTV surveillance, and therefore the key aspect in that aspect would be, are there adequate and proper notices regarding the CCTV preference? Okay, so the key aspect there, you must notify the general public or maybe within your organization that yes, this organization is under 24-hour CCTV coverage. So that will be quite clear that people must be informed clearly before or at a point of correction. So if it's a gate, or if it is a school or a hospital or any other enterprise, put a notice at the gate saying that sections within this organization or these premises are under CCTV footage coverage.
Excellent. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been a really wonderful time. I wish we could have, again, an extensive period to really have this much more further, but our time certainly is up, and it would be really awesome for us to continue, but we can do that. For those questions that we haven't responded to, whether on the chat or the Q&A, because I see as many have arrived, allow us to respond to you much more individualized. So we will be able to send you a response to every question that you've asked for, of course. And a request is that you could be able to just put in your details in what is on your screen still. So that QR code there, just click it and give in your details and allow us to reach you whenever you're available to be able to adequately give you support that you need to be able to comply with the Data Protection Act 2019. And of course, as I had mentioned earlier, we will look at the ranking in terms of those people who had responded to that call at the earliest. And the first 5 we'll attempt and, of course, make sure that we're able to give you free support in terms of just a desktop review of identifying the risks, and then further conversations we can have them as we go along. So I believe from this conversation, 2 things or 2 choices that remains to all of us, you and myself. The first choice is you do nothing and hope that you are very compliant with the Act. Or the second choice is that we can support you, and of course you can identify your exposure before regulators do that. And you know, when they come, penalties will come, things to do with reputational damage will come, you will pay claims, you will be sued, your name will be up. The risks are just very humongous, and you don't want to find yourself in such kind of a spot. So take the earliest opportunity to be able to mitigate such risks before they get you at the wrong place. So good afternoon, good morning, and have a wonderful day ahead, even with compliance as it relates to data protection. Thank you very much, and everybody have a good day.
I look off.